October 24, 1944. The Vosges Mountains of northeastern France. The forest was ancient and indifferent, the trees so thick that daylight reached the ground as a dim grey nothing, and the cold settled into a man's bones long before the sun had fully set. Private James Hartley of Corsicana, Texas, was 22 years old, and he had not eaten in 36 hours. He was lying in a shallow trench behind a fallen spruce trunk, his M1 Garand pressed against his cheek, his ammunition nearly gone, and all around him, in the darkness, the sound of German voices moving through the trees. Hartley was a member of the 1st Battalion, a 141st Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division. The 36 was a Texas outfit descended from the Texas National Guard, and the men who served in it wore that identity like religion. They called themselves the Tay-Patchers after the shoulder patch they carried. They had bled through Italy, survived Salerno, and crossed the Rapido River in one of the costliest assault crossings of the entire war. Now they were here in France, cut off from the rest of the Allied line, surrounded by 2 German regiments, with no food, no water resupply, no morphine for their wounded, and no reason to believe anyone was coming. 211 men were trapped in that forest. They had been encircled for 2 days. Their radio battery was dying. Their dead lay where they fell, because there was no ground safe enough to carry them to. James Hartley did not know it. He would not have believed it if someone had told him. But the men the United States Army had chosen to come through those trees and bring him home were the very men that a petition circulating back in Texas had recently argued should never be allowed to set foot in his state after the war was over. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that the history books leave out and the ones that deserve to be told loudest. Private First Class Barney Hajiro was 23 years old. He had grown up in Punine, Hawaii, the son of Japanese immigrants who had come to work the sugarcane fields of Maui and stayed because America was where their children were born. Barney was quiet by nature, compact and physically powerful from a life of hard labour, and he had a reputation in his unit for doing the thing that needed doing without waiting to be asked twice. By the time Barney raised his right hand to enlist in the summer of 1943, his parents had been living under government curfew for over a year. On the mainland, more than 110 Japanese Americans had been removed from their homes and placed in internment camps by executive order, classified as potential enemies in their own country, on no evidence except the nationality of their parents. The government had taken their farms, their businesses, their bank accounts, and their freedom, and replaced all of it with a tar paper barracks in the California desert. Barney joined the army because he understood something the men who wrote those orders had not yet figured out. The only argument that could not be ignored was the one made on a battlefield. He was assigned to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a unit the army had created specifically for Japanese American volunteers, kept segregated from white soldiers, the way the army kept all of its minority units segregated. The official reasoning was military efficiency. The actual reasoning was more familiar and uglier. The 442nd adopted a motto that said everything about how those men understood their situation. 2 words: go for broke, a gambler's phrase. The language of a man who has nothing left to protect except his word and decides to bet everything on it. By the autumn of 1944, the 442nd had built a combat record that should have been mathematically impossible. They had fought through the Italian Gothic line, through mountain terrain that experienced German units had spent months fortifying. Their casualty rates were among the highest of any American regimental-sized unit in the entire European theatre. Elagabalus didn't just want to act like a woman. They kept accepting the hardest assignments because they understood that their performance was not only about the war in front of them. It was about what would happen to their families when the war ended. Every hill they took was an argument. Every objective they seized was evidence. They were fighting 2 wars at the same time, one against Germany and one against the idea in their own country that they did not belong. In October 1944, the 442nd was attached to the 36th Division in France and ordered north through the Vosges forest to support the Allied drive toward the Rhine. What they found in those mountains was the kind of fighting soldiers do not write home about. Steep ground, interlocking German defensive positions built into the ridgelines, cold mud that pulled at every boot and soaked through every uniform, men dying in the fog between trees so close together that a tank could not move between them. Then on October 24th, the order came from General John Dahlquist, commander of the 36th Division. The lost battalion needed to be rescued. Every other unit in the division had tried to break through the German encirclement. Every one of them had failed and taken severe casualties attempting it. The 442nd was going in. The men of the 442nd understood exactly what they were being ordered to do. They had already spent 5 days fighting through Brueris in combat that left some of their companies at less than half strength. The ground ahead was in German hands, every approach route covered by entrenched machine gun positions on the high ground, and the men trapped behind that German line were from the 36th Division, the Texas outfit. That same year, the Texas State Senate had passed a resolution opposing the post-war settlement of Japanese Americans in the state. Texas veterans groups had circulated petitions arguing that returning Japanese American soldiers should be barred from purchasing land or establishing residency. Governor Coke Stevenson had signed statements expressing support for the policy. The men of the 442nd were being ordered to break themselves against German positions in the French mountains to save soldiers from a state whose government had formally voted to keep them out. Sergeant Chester Tanaka of K Company wrote in his diary that night. He did not write about anger or bitterness. He wrote that the men understood the mission and they would carry it out because the soldiers in those trees were Americans, and because what politicians said in state capitals and what soldiers did in the field were two entirely different things, and because go for broke was not a motto reserved for the easy days. The assault into the German encirclement began on October 25th. The 442nd advanced directly into prepared positions on the ridge. The fighting was close and sustained and utterly merciless in terrain that gave every possible advantage to the defenders. For every 100 yards of ground the regiment took, they left men behind in the pine needles and the frost. Barney Hajiro was in the assault on October 29th when his company came under fire from 2 German machine gun positions that had completely stopped the advance. The men around him were pinned, unable to move forward or withdraw without taking catastrophic losses. Without waiting for orders, without a plan being assembled, Hajiro rose from his position and charged directly at the first gun. He drew the fire onto himself and drove grenades into the position until it went silent. He immediately turned without pausing and charged the second position the same way. He cleared them both. His actions opened the only available lane through the German line, and his platoon moved through it. By any reasonable accounting, he should have been killed during that charge. He was not on October 30th, 1944, at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The lead elements of the 442nd broke through the German perimeter and reached the survivors of the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry. The 211 trapped men were alive. They had been without resupply for 6 days. They were frostbitten, starving, hollow-eyed, and several had to be carried out because they could no longer walk on their own. When the soldiers of the 442nd came through the trees, some of the Texans wept. They did not ask where their rescuers came from or what their last names looked like on a service record. They held on to whoever reached them first, and for a long time they did not let go. The price the 442nd paid to bring those men home was not a footnote. In 8 days of combat in the Vosges, the regiment suffered approximately 800 casualties, killed, wounded and missing, to rescue 211 men. General Dahlquist ordered the regiment to form up for a formal review after the rescue, intending to deliver a commendation. He arrived at the parade ground to find it nearly empty. He turned to Regimental Commander Charles Pence and asked where the men were. Pence told the general that what he was looking at was all that remained fit for duty. The regiment had torn itself down to almost nothing to carry out his order. Dahlquist later wrote that he had never seen men fight the way those men fought. He never publicly addressed the fact that the men who fought that were doing it while their parents sat in American internment camps. James Hartley went home to Corsicana after the war. He rarely spoke about the 6 days in the Vosges forest, and when he did, he said only that they came through the trees and they got us out, and that was all that mattered. He lived until 1979. Whether he ever thought about the Texas petition and the men who honoured it with their blood, no record tells us. Barney Hajiro went home to Hawaii and returned to the life of a working man, staying out of public attention for decades. He did not know for most of those years that the official recommendation for the Medal of Honor his commanding officer had filed after the Vosges fighting had been quietly downgraded somewhere in the Army's administrative system. He was not alone. The Army had reviewed the Medal of Honor recommendations of Japanese-American soldiers during the war and reduced a significant number of them before the paperwork was finalized. No official document said the reductions were because of race. The patterns said it loudly enough. In 1996, the United States Army commissioned a formal review of World War II Medal of Honor awards to determine whether eligible Black and Asian American recipients had been passed over on the basis of race. The review was thorough and the conclusion was unambiguous. 22 Japanese American veterans had been denied the decoration they had lawfully earned in combat. In June 2000, 55 years after the war ended, President Bill Clinton presided over a ceremony in the East Room of the White House. 20 of the 22 honorees were deceased and their families accepted on their behalf. 7 were still living. Barney Hajiro was one of them. He was 79 years old and he stood in that room and received the Medal of Honor that his country had owed him since October 1944. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team became the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in the recorded history of the United States Army. More than 18,000 individual decorations, 8 Presidential Unit citations, 21 Medals of Honor after the 2000 review. Their total casualties across the war exceeded 9,400 in a regiment that never fielded more than roughly 4,000 men at once, which means on average every man in that regiment was a casualty more than twice over, most of them evacuated, healed enough and sent back in. They did all of this while their parents sat behind wire in American desert camps. They did it while petitions in their own country debated whether they deserved to come home. They did it under a motto that was a gambler's philosophy and a soldier's oath, and in the end, an irrefutable historical verdict: go for broke. When the men of the 141st were lying in the Vosges forest in the dark with no ammunition and no hope, the soldiers who came through the trees for them were men their own government had classified as a potential enemy. They came through anyway. They always came through anyway. If you believe these men should never be forgotten, drop one word in the comments below, remembered, and subscribe, because if we stop telling these stories, the record goes quiet again, and these men deserve better than quiet.